thousands of people all over the world have started a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet because they had a friend who was doing it, having great results. They initially started having great results, losing weight, their diabetes getting better, their waistline getting better. And then they went to their doctor and had some labs checked for a routine checkup. And lo and behold, their total cholesterol and their LDL cholesterol were sky high. In many cases, it's higher than the doctor had ever seen. The doctor proceeds to crap his or her pants and says, you've got to stop this immediately. It's going to kill you at any minute. Well, I have two guests with me today who have been up to good. They've been working on some research that I hope is going to make a lot of you guys breathe a large sigh of relief. I know I have. And I want you to share this video with anybody you know who started keto or carnivore and their LDL cholesterol went sky high, because they're going to be very interested in this topic, and to also be interested in the fact that keto or carnivore is back on the menu for them, most likely. So I have two guests with me. I have Dave Feldman, who you guys probably have met before and know. I also have Nick Norwitz. Nick is a PhD. And he now is at Harvard Medical School. Are you in your third year or fourth year?
Third year.
Third year. So that's the hard year. So I remember third year med school. That's not a joke. And so despite that, he has time to do things like, write research papers and fight on Twitter. And so kudos to him. I wish I was that smart. Dave Feldman, previous computer software engineer and entrepreneur, who did exactly what I described. He went keto because he was having a little bit of metabolic health issues. Everything started getting better until he checked that lipid panel. And he said, what the what? And that's where this all began. Who wants to start? Dave, you want to lead us off?
Sure. I didn't say what, but I did say something that probably rhymes a little bit with it. I'd gone on a ketogenic diet in 2015. My cholesterol went through the roof. I was surprised because I did not see that with my sister and my dad, who started around the same time. And that's what started this obsession. I wanted to figure out why it happened to me, even though I'm a little leaner and more metabolically healthy. And, common sense is that no, if anybody, they should be the ones who see it. But once I saw that my cholesterol went up and up, way higher than I would typically see, at that point, I became really obsessed with trying to understand how it worked. Started looking into reading up on how lipidology is. And I, you've heard the story a million times by this point. I would see a pattern that looked a lot like a network. And as a software engineer, I work on networks, and it seemed like it was about the distribution of fat in our body, which sure enough does involve cholesterol. So I started doing a number of experiments, found that I could change it up and down. That became the beginning of what you now know as the lipid energy model, which helps to try to explain why this happens. And what we'll be talking about here is what eventually I found other folks like myself, and particularly probably closer to Nick Norwitz, who are very lean, having this triad, not just having high LDL cholesterol, but also in combination, having high HDL cholesterol, the so-called good cholesterol, and low triglycerides. Those are usually considered to be lower cardiovascular disease risk. But what happens if you have them together? The problem is nobody was doing any research on this. And since we were seeing such huge levels, I really wanted researchers to get interested in it. Eventually, in 2019, I said, what the heck? I'll just go to the community, the people who are on right now. Said, could we just crowdfund this? Could we just get, our own money together and actually get a study put on so that we could actually study 100 of these folks? And that's exactly what happened. That's kind of my tee up for what I know we'll be talking about next.
Yes. And Nick Norwitz, while everybody hits the thumbs up button to let YouTube know that this is excellent content that people need to watch, tell us your quick backstory and how you became involved in this.
Yeah. Well, similar to Dave and many other people, I adopted a ketogenic diet. For me, it was for therapeutic purposes, to treat my inflammatory bowel disease. I actually posted to Twitter this morning. I had my first colonoscopy since going keto because my symptoms resolved, my inflammatory markers went down. But this is a tangent, but somewhat relevant. The way you actually diagnose a inflammatory bowel disease is with biopsies of the colon. Yep. And I just got the biopsy results back today. And after 5 years of this lifestyle, there's no sign of disease. So anyway, that's a tangent. I'm excited about that today. But I went keto for my.
You should be excited about that. That's freaking awesome. Huzzah.
Yeah. Anyway, and just for context, we can get into what my ketogenic diet has looked like over the years, because it has evolved. I'm experimenting with things, including at periods of time, cookies. That's a teaser. But I actually went on a low saturated fat ketogenic diet because I thought, that was the healthy way to do it. Nevertheless, my LDL went first to 300. It's peaked at 545. When you tell that to doctors, even though they know, like, I'm a PhD and I'm medical students, are like, you're making this up. There's no way. It's really gotten that high. And obviously, initially that shocked me, like Dave, like many other people. So it's something that I started to dig into a little bit. And over time, I don't even remember how we got to know each other, but we started getting, collectively involved in this topic of lean mass hyperresponders. I consider one of my greatest skills my ability to identify good questions, and Dave was asking excellent questions. And so I was very provoked. And a couple of years later, here we are. I was saying earlier, I think the reason this is such, a monumental story, because, research in some respects is about stories, is one, it's studying something that is so bizarre, metabolically so fascinating, that I don't get how anybody interested in medicine or science isn't just like enthralled.
Yes.
So there's that, the lean mass hyperresponder, which is very unique, and we can talk about it. And then on top of that, the narrative, usually, a remarkable science comes from established scientists. And this is a case where somebody outside the scientific establishment asked a good question and pursued it, and, built a team around him. He now has like an army of people who, are very much in the establishment, or at least in, entrenched in academia. I'm one example. I'm very early on in my career, but there are people, the PI of this study has like 1,200 papers. He's
1,600 now.
Something like that. He has colleagues at Stanford, Harvard, Oxford, all around the world who have been drawn to Dave, not because he has a PhD or an MD or a particular affiliation, but because he asks really good questions about this really fascinating phenomenon. And what just dropped was, we can talk about the mechanism, we can nerd out about the lipid energy model, and I hope we get to that. But the big question with respect to this phenotype is, well, what is the risk associated with the phenotype with respect to cardiovascular disease? People will probably tell you, the preponderance of evidence, the body of evidence says that high ApoB, high LDL is always harmful.
Yes.
The issue with the whole preponderance of evidence thing is the body of evidence applies best to, populations in which the data were collected. And these lean mass hyperresponders are so unique. I don't think there's any comparator with similar LDL levels that isn't, associated with metabolic dysfunction or a broken lipid metabolism via genetics. This seems to be a metabolic response from everything we can assess. What is the consequence of this metabolic response associated with high LDL on cardiovascular risk? So this was, the background behind the study. And a few days ago, Professor Matthew Budoff presented at an academic conference the findings.
Yes. And so I've been practicing family medicine for over 22 years. And the thing that I do is pattern recognition. When I'm listening to histories, when I'm doing a physical, when I'm looking at lab work, I'm looking for patterns. And I feel like every good doctor does that, right? And so you're exactly right, Nick. On Twitter, which is where the majority of academics, slap fight, anytime I see something that I'm not aware of, it immediately piques my interest. I'm like, whoa, wait, what? Even if it's something, even if it's in the vegan, plant-based, whatever, something I've never heard before, I'm immediately intrigued. I'm looking it up. I'm doing a PubMed search. I'm like, is that really? I didn't know that. But what I'm seeing in the plant-based cardiologist and lipidologist is they literally have zero interest. They don't even want to look at it, much less be curious about it. Even if they still said, okay, fine, lean mass hyperresponder is a real thing, but still you've got all the risk factors that definitely, but it's still very odd that this happened to lean people. I can't explain that, but they have no interest in that. So I think it's going to be quite telling how people react to this. So let's bring up this study. And this study is not published. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say,
just be sure. Yeah, this is a presentation. This is undergoing peer review now, if I understand correctly, and is going to be published in the very near future. These slides are from a presentation that Dr. Budoff gave recently. And Dave, right off the bat, I've already seen a comment on Twitter, because smart people who read studies, who are laymen, right, they want to know who funded the study. And I think in many, many cases, that's a vital question: who funded this study? And so let's get that out of the way all right up front, because I've already heard a comment that basically you paid for this, and therefore the results are going to say whatever you want them to say. So talk to us about the protections you put in place and how this was funded and how we know that we can trust this data.
Sure. I mean, at the point where I was hypothesizing that this population would likely be lower risk, again, it's a hypothesis and it's not fully proven. But at that point, I realized how I raise the money and how I conduct the study would understandably be highly scrutinized. If you know well in advance that you're probably going to get a lot of eyes on it, then it's all the more reason to watch your step from the first step. And so instead of raising the money through a GoFundMe or going to some corporation that might have an interest in this, I started a foundation, the Citizen Science Foundation, where I've been raising money directly from individuals with smaller, more modest pockets, individuals with bigger pockets, but they've all been individuals. There's not a company that we partnered with or anything. Either the individuals have paid us directly or through their own foundation if they were a deeper pocket. But I also wanted to ensure that we, as the foundation, we were the arm that helped to both build the protocol for the study and to help fund it. But as you can see up there in that first slide, down in the bottom left-hand corner, the Lundquist Institute, that's the one that Dr. Budoff runs and who he's the PI of the study for. They're the ones who collect the data. So we can help bring them the lean mass hyperresponders who they're going to study, but they collect the data, they run the analyses, everything is in-house. So even if we were raising money, which we're not, from some obscure source, it doesn't change the fact that the Lundquist Institute is the research center that's actually conducting the research. And because you'll be curious, I want to mention one more thing. They have absolutely reported negative findings. So they don't, it's not whoever pays the check happens to get a study result that they like. Quite literally, Dr. Budoff, I'm pretty sure it was actually at this last major conference, the AHA conference, had to report negative findings on a study that they ran. And I may be wrong, but I believe it's the STOP trial, if I'm not mistaken. So I say all of this to anybody who is concerned that there could be any, question of impropriety. I think it's valid always with studies to ask where the funding came from. And I believe that this was always going to be something that understandably would get that same level of scrutiny.
Yes, absolutely. Nick, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I'm not involved in the funding, but I do know Dave, and and I won't give details, but I will say some people think Dave's a little bit crazy. And the strongest and or only data point I have to be consistent with that hypothesis is the amount of money he's personally taken in pursuing this research. Like, he has taken huge financial losses in order to pursue this question. The proposition that this is for his, financial advantage, or that he's, paying somebody off, is just, if you knew him, just like laughable. So I have nothing really to add other than just.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that assessment. And so, Dave, I think it's safe to say that you don't have a line of lean mass hyperresponder supplements in the work that will correct this, or no. Because typically we look at who financed the study, because typically they stand to financially gain. And so I can't think of a way how you would financially gain from this study, whether it was positive or negative findings, So you're on record now saying you don't have a line of lean mass hyperresponder supplements. You're not trying to work on an FDA approved prescription medication for lean mass hyperresponders that you own the patent to. None of that stuff's working in the background.
No, it would have been way easier to raise money for the research if there was some business case to be made for the research. That's actually how a lot of this gets done. No, I can. You can audit my wife, who will absolutely confirm that I make substantially less money than I did as a senior platform developer, as when I was an entrepreneur before taking on this research. But I want to say this honestly. What I was doing before was developing next generation gambling platforms here in Las Vegas, which, don't get me wrong, really paid me well. Nothing quite compares to working with such amazing people like Nick Norwitz to advance research that could be cutting edge and may really be helping a lot of important people like Nick Norwitz, who just now got talking about. I mean, he completed his PhD from a hospital bed, and that's the kind of drive he has. But sure as heck, I want to get that kind of obstacle out of the way. So when he finds therapeutic relief from keto, as you know, so many people have, then by golly, if the one and only thing they're concerned about is seeing their cholesterol go sky high, we need to bring them the data to find out if that really is a risk. So that's, to me, that's, I not to sound mushy, but it's that kind of fulfillment is that you can't put a price tag on it. That's all I can say.
Totally agree. And speaking of the research, let's go through this. So nobody had any disclosures that actually were involved in the research. The funding was provided by the Citizen Science Foundation, but you had absolutely no input into research design. Which researchers? Go ahead.
We did. No, for sure. There was a team of us. Yeah, no, there was a team of us that worked with Dr. Budoff and his team, and we were working out the details. And only at the point where we could, agree on what the protocol would be, did we move forward. Now, to be sure, that is the whole point. The whole point is that everybody has sign off throughout each stage as we're like coming into it and as it's happening. But you want, that's exactly how you want to set it up, so that from that point, the Lundquist Institute can then execute. So I definitely did have a lot of say, especially at the beginning. But once it's in motion, then it's you have to have more not superfluous, but more minor amendments that typically can come up, and even then, you're very explicit about what those circumstances are.
Gotcha. So who wants to tell us what we're seeing here and what it means? Nick, are you
want to go for that one, Nick? Yeah, so this is where, of course, Budoff would be better suited than all of us, but he's going through the various things that a CT angiogram will show. You look like you wanted to say, Nick, or do you want me to?
No, basically the same thing. That we have a highly sensitive scan, the coronary CT angiogram, which is not just looking at calcified plaque, like a CAC. There was one doctor on Twitter who got very confused over this point.
Yes. So let's be very clear. These images are not CAC scans. These are not coronary artery calcium scores. This is a CAT scan of the coronary arteries.
Mm-hmm.
CT angiogram.
So you can look at non-calcified plaque as well as what you see the calcified plaque. So you can see it at the top of the slide, CCTA, coronary CT angiography, and they're getting very sensitive. So yeah, basically just an advanced imaging study at the heart to look at even soft plaque, non-calcified plaque.
So we can see calcified plaque. We can see soft plaque. We can see stenosis. This is not a CAC. This is an actual CT angiogram.
Yep.
So because there was a doctor on Twitter who completely got it wrong. And it's like, CACs don't prove nothing. It's like, bro, this is not a CAC study.
Yeah. He also didn't know Budoff's name, but that's fine. So but Budoff, some guy named Budoff. It was pretty embarrassing, actually, very unprofessional. But you can do a bunch of different kind of like composite scores, but the one you'll see later on in the graph, the total plaque score, you're going through different segments of the arteries throughout the heart, and you're kind of scoring on a grade from I think it's 0 to 3, how much plaque there is, and then you get a cumulative score. So that's how they score.
Gotcha. And so, what were the objectives of this? What were we trying to? What was the research question?
Well, in this case, let me actually take a step back real quick. The scans that you just saw from the prior slide, the study as it is currently arranged is longitudinal, because that's what we believe we could only have at the beginning, is that we could just compare these scans to the participants' own scans. So they get a scan at around day 0, they get another scan at around 365, so about a year later, and then those two scans get compared. And what we want to see is if there's an increase of plaque at a population level, and by how much. Now, there probably would be if they're people in middle age, which our group is. So that's just more likely than not, given almost every population does. But while I was getting this thing started and we were crowdfunding, everything was coming together, there was another study going on that I wasn't aware of at the time called Miami Heart. And they too were getting CT angiography on their population, which was a larger population. I want to say it's 2,400. And they were getting CT angiography, but it was a one-time scan. However, that provided a unique opportunity, because if we had enough people in our population that could be matched with people from their population as a subset, we could do this match analysis. So the reason I want to mention that before you go to the next slide is that was not the original design of this study, because we didn't have that match at that point in time. But once all of our baseline 100 people had gotten their first scan, we could expand to allow for this match analysis. And that's what this particular match design is that you're about to go into. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Keep that in mind for what we're going to next. So we could just straight read it, which is, while most individuals who adopt a carbohydrate-restricted diets for obesity or diabetes exhibit general improvements in all lipid parameters, LDL-C, HDL-C, and triglyceride, a subgroup called lean mass hyperresponders either exhibit extreme increases in LDL cholesterol, like we were describing. LMHR defined by LDL-C in the FH range, although the high HDL-C and low triglycerides, along with high HDL-C and low triglycerides, this triad tends to occur in lean, otherwise healthy individuals, which is supported by the research that we, of course, would link as well. And the aim of this study is to prospectively evaluate the plaque progression over the course of 1 year in 100 metabolically healthy lean mass hyperresponders or near lean mass hyperresponders subject on the ketogenic diet with LDL-C of 190 milligrams per deciliter or higher. Part of the 190 is very relevant because that, for the longest time, has been the clinical cutoff point for which it's just for many of these guidelines, it's just assumed you do have FH. And that's why this is a very novel population.
Right. Now, have you guys collected enough data yet? Let me throw in a question, Dave. Have you guys collected enough data yet that you can say with some degree of certainty, if 1,000 people adopted a ketogenic way of eating, what percentage of that 1,000 people would be a lean mass hyperresponder? I see Nick getting nervous. Do you have enough data to even make a guess at what the percentage of lean mass hyperresponders in the general keto population is?
Go ahead, Nick.
Well, we don't. That's one of the things we really want to assess is the ability to convert. We do think this is a metabolic phenomenon. The question of genetics comes up. And what I'd say with respect to genetics is I don't think this is genetically driven primarily. It can't explain enough of the phenotype. First of all, it's not congenital. You're not born with it. It's a response to carbohydrate restriction. And then genetics would be hard to explain other things like the association with BMI. The leaner you are, the higher your LDL. And that is across individuals and within individuals. So if I gain weight, if I gain body fat, my LDL goes down. Again, my genetics don't change. Could there be a gene environment interaction with weight? Potentially. What I would say as a nuance is it's possible there are permissive genetics. So your genetics might have to leave the door ajar so you can have the metabolic response. That's possible.
Right.
But, the question comes up is, what is the convertibility? If you had, any individual with a particular genetic makeup, if you made them lean and put them on a ketogenic diet and completely controlled everything, what percent could you convert? I have to guess, I think me and Dave both guessed like upwards of 75, 80%. There are hints in the literature. Like if you look at some of the trials in lean people, for example, there's a 2021 controlled trial by Buren et al. I think it had 17 young women, if I'm correct, Dave. Maybe it was 21. I think it was 17. But they weren't LMHR because they weren't, other areas of the lipid energy model. They weren't super active, but they were all trending towards lean mass hyperresponder. And if you look across the randomized control trials on low carb diets, there's an inverse association between BMI and LDL-C rises. All these things that would just they don't fit neatly into the genetic explanation. This is definitely not FH. There's going to be a slide coming up that kind of shows the distinction between this and FH. So I want to differentiate between those. Percent convertibility, we'd be speculating.
Gotcha. I think I heard you say, Ken, before that you anecdotally see it's about a third, and a third that you see.
Yeah, about a third of people when they start keto, their LDL actually goes down. About a third of people, it stays the same-ish. And about a third of people, it goes up. And then in my experience, somewhere between 1% to 3% get the crazy LDL elevations.
But can I caveat that? A third based on the general population, not lean people.
That's right. Gen Pop. Yep. Yeah. And then also, I do see people who are not lean who have great triglycerides, have great HDL, have great A1C, have great fasting insulin, have a normal CRP, and they have an LDL cholesterol of 350.
So we have a paper coming out. Can't say too much about it, but do have to mention our colleague who's not here, Adrian Sotomoda, who's going to be just absolutely avalanched with enormous credit because it is a hell of a paper. That's all I can say for now, but I suspect it will influence your opinion a little bit closer to ours. It's worth emphasizing that we don't think it's completely a perfect rule, this question of BMI and leanness. But do we think that there's a fairly statistical probability, especially as you get, say, under 25 BMI, the likelihood you're going to exhibit extraordinarily high levels of LDL? Honestly, I'm feeling stronger than I've ever been coming up until this point. And as you're up to BMI of higher, it's not that it's impossible. It's just that it becomes less and less likely, seemingly, given the data that we've seen to this point.
Excellent. Okay. And let's go to the next slide. And here's the difference between the lean mass hyperresponders and familial hypercholesterolemia.
Yeah. I mean, people can pause and look at the video. The point is, these are not the same thing. People like to analogize them because we know FH is, a high risk condition. But in FH, it's familial, it's inherited. It is a genetic phenotype where you have a broken lipid metabolism driving your LDL up. That's different than potentially a metabolic response. So you can see the distinctions laid out here. But just, the question of risk doesn't necessarily, just because they're different with respect to etiology and phenotype doesn't mean they're necessarily different with respect to risk, but it's a place where I like to start the conversation to say, look, these are two separate things. So let's not necessarily conflate what we know about the one with the other. And that's just a sticking point for me because
I think that's very important.
An analogy people like to draw that I think is inappropriate.
I totally agree. And I tell everyone whose doctor tells them they have FH, there's actually genetic testing for that. Did your doctor do that? Because if your doctor didn't do that, you don't know if you have FH or not. There's actually testing to verify that. And the vast majority say, no, they just looked at my lipid panel and said I had FH.
There's a nuance there. In that FH now is technically a phenotypic diagnosis for a genotypic condition. And what I mean by that is they're defining it now just grossly by LDL levels, assuming underlying genetics, because there can be so many genetic contributors that you can't, and the genome isn't fully annotated, that you can't really look for all of them. You can look for certain monogenetic forms, but not necessarily the polygenetic form. So it's a genetic condition, but the phenotype is used for the diagnosis. And I think this is just a shortcoming of how people are trending towards diagnosing FH. And this trend is permissible because of an ignorance of the lean mass hyperresponder phenomenon. People don't think this exists as a thing. And so it's, we just assume that, oh, your LDL levels are that high. The only way you can get that high is you have messed up genetics.
Yes.
LMHR proved that's not true.
And to be fair, if you really are thinking of this from an exposure standpoint, it's understandable. They're trying to find any and all ways that your presumed genetics are bringing up even a little bit. It's almost like saying, okay, maybe you're not a smoker, like monogenetic FH, but maybe you're hanging out in rooms where smoking is taking place. So even if you have genetics that are associated with your LDL being 6 milligrams per deciliter higher, we should still catch that. We should still identify it as being part of this polygenetic FH milieu. But to Nick's point, I don't especially love that because I kind of feel like it's casting such a wide net. It's another place where I think the lean mass hyperresponder research could really change a lot of this directionality on how they keep, thinking of this overall.
I totally agree. The trend in all practice of medicine is toward laziness, and I think the lean mass hyperresponder hypothesis, after this is published, is going to force lipidologists to tighten up and call things exactly what they are. Which slide do you guys want to go to now? Do we have something to talk about here?
I think we pretty much covered it. Inclusion criteria. Right. We have the triad liberalized a little bit from standard lean mass hyperresponders, although the average markers, as we'll see in a minute, were lean mass hyperresponder levels. But this is just inclusion and triad criteria.
Gotcha.
Now, I by the way, I love this table a lot. So this is what we're looking at here is we're looking at all of the different demographics and also lipid levels and also risk factors on the left. And then you see the keto column, and then you see the Miami Heart column. So what we're trying to determine is how close were they able to make the match in Lundquist. Lundquist has a great statistician team, and she tried to make as close a match as she could, and as close to 1-to-1 as possible, with, of course, the exception of LDL. And I was just stunned at how good this was. So it's worth taking a step back real quick to get back to how we got to these two groups, because it's about 80 people in both groups. First, they have to take our 100 baseline scans, look at the people that are in it, look at their ages, and then they trimmed off the ones who were too old, who wouldn't have made it into the Miami Heart cohort in the first place because they're too old, and those who are too young. And that added up to a total of 20, which is great. That means we had 80 that were within that age range. Now, the 80 that were within the age range at that point, they then have to see if there's a subgroup that's within the Miami Heart pool of participants that if you pulled them out and did so with statistical probabilities, you could actually end up with this column as close of a match as you can. And this is how strong it is. Both of them had an average age of 55.5. The one other key difference beyond LDL is body mass index, but as we just got done talking about, that's a part of the lipid energy model and sort of what we would expect. So the body mass of the keto group was 22.5. Of Miami Heart, it was 25.8. But this is actually a relatively healthy group with regard to their lipid levels. They both have high HDL, low triglycerides. But look, the male percentage is identical. Same thing with the ethnicity: white, Asian, Hispanic. The getting past the lipid levels, the blood pressures are nearly identical: systolic, diastolic. HSCRP very low for both of them. A1C is nearly on top of each other, 5.4 to 5.5. And both had 2 past smokers. I was just stunned that we were able to see something like this without there being additional adjusting or modeling, which, as you know, is something that I always strive for: stratification over modification wherever possible. So I'm sorry if I have to gush a lot on this particular table, but I just love it so much. Nick, did you want to add anything?
I think just broadly, the point I'd make is it's very reasonably matched, as could be expected. There are areas where you just, because LMHR are so unique, you cannot match. So, for example, like, look, the HDLs don't match, but you're not going to find a population in Miami Heart with like HDL of 90 and match for other things. So you have to optimize with what you can. And this is very good matching, I think, with all, relevant variables. And even when the p-value is low, nobody's going to say, a diastolic difference of 3 is like clinically meaningful to any extent, or the HbA1c of 0.1. Like, the focus here is where the red box is, which is one group has an LDL of 272, which they've had for almost 5 years. The duration of exposure was 4.7 on average, whereas the other group has a LDL of 123. And just as a fun sidebar, it might even be mentioned on the next slide, the LDL levels of the keto group, the LMHR and near LMHR group prior to keto, so like 5 years ago, was 122. So basically right on top of the Miami Heart population. So I think that's interesting because it, goes, again, consistent with the idea that this is a response. It's not like these people had elevated levels all the time. They're responding to the carbohydrate restriction. And also because, in a sense, given that they're both pretty healthy populations overall, one can consider this, although we don't have proper baselines, kind of like the elevated LDL 4.7-year exposure, since they would have had pretty similar LDL area under the curves up until that point. They have the same age, and the pre-keto LDL was almost exactly the same as the Miami Heart.
Yes, intriguing. So very well matched between the control group and the participants.
All right, yeah. the big drum roll.
We can get to the image, the graphic, because I guess we're just going to hit that anyway, rather than the bullets.
Right. Do you want me to go to the graphic or stay here?
You can read through the bullets if you want.
Yeah, let's go through the bullets real quick.
Okay.
The match mean age was 55.5, as we just mentioned, with a mean LDL cholesterol of 272. And yes, the max. This is one neat, interesting thing on the bullet is our peak person had an LDL cholesterol of 591 milligrams per deciliter, which was well into homozygous FH territory. And yes, 4.7 years duration on ketogenic diet. So that's almost half a decade. There was no significant difference in coronary plaque burden as compared to the Miami Heart controls. And on top of that, there's no relationship of the LDL cholesterol elevations and plaque. Now, I know that we go into the inner quartiles with the CAC and CCTA. You can pass on that for the moment, and we can just go ahead and move to the graph.
Sure.
Oh, although I guess we do kind of get more into the semi-quantitative here.
Yeah. Just so people know, what they're presenting is a median and then an interquartile range. So median is where, if you have 100 people, where the 50th person is, where the person in the middle is. And then the interquartile range is, the middle half, so to speak. So cutting it off at the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile, giving you that, range.
And we're assuming that the Miami Heart participants just ate a standard diet. Is that correct?
Yeah,
I believe so. It's funny. I actually don't know offhand if they collected dietary information. I'll have to ask Karam Nasir, who's the principal investigator on that, but that's a good question.
It's mixed macro. I mean, they're not low carb.
Right, exactly. They're just eating whatever they want, basically. Okay. What's this?
Dave,
so this is our central graphic, and I'm going to try to break it out for you. There's the left side is the keto group, the right side is the Miami Heart, and it's a composite. There's two graphs that are sort of being added. If you look to the left side, you'll see LDL cholesterol is on the y-axis there, and then on the right side you can see total plaque score. Now the total plaque score, if you look in the upper right hand corner, it's that green. This is pretty relevant because you can actually literally see physically what the differences are in the total plaque score. I want to explain the total plaque score real quick. Nick had mentioned it from a little bit earlier, but basically they determined through the coronary arteries in advance of doing the study 15 different sites of interest, places where there's bifurcation, places where there's shear stress, where there's more likely a place where plaque might have developed. And so it'd be like if we determine, the roads outside where there's accidents commonly at certain intersections, to then check those intersections and places like that throughout the coronary arteries. Then the reader gives the score from 0 to 3. 0 is no plaque, no detectable plaque by the reader. And a score of 1 is mild, score of 2 is medium, score of 3 is severe. So 15 sites of a score of 0 to 3 means that there's a possible total plaque score of up to 45. And so that axis you see over to the right, you see it goes from 0 to 16. The good news is both these populations actually at a population level not only have a low total plaque score, a low TPS, but as you can see on both the left and the right, half, actually a little over half for our group, has no total plaque score at all. There's no detectable plaque in our group at all. And with Miami Heart, it's almost half. I think it's a little more than half. We'll have some detectable amount, but fortunately, the rest have no total plaque. Now, for the remaining amount, it's sorted. So you can see that the first portion there is a 1, and then a 2, and then a 3, and it keeps going up from there. When you think of it as sorted and you're looking at them next to each other, you can see that the area under the curve is very similar to each other. That's why there's not a statistical difference between the two. But while we don't have it in these slides, technically ours has a lower area under the curve. Our cohort has a lower area under the curve. But I say that while coupling it with emphasis, that there's still not a statistically significant difference. Now, the second part of that is, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say the second part of that, going back to the LDL cholesterol, is because it's sorted, because you can see the plaque graduating upward, you can see this huge vibrating line in both of them for the LDL cholesterol. The reason that's important is because you can see that there's not a correlation, as you might expect, with the LDL cholesterol and the total plaque score. So if LDL cholesterol associated even loosely with the total plaque score, we would expect both of those lines to kind of go at least a little bit in tandem with each other. And that's not what we see really with either group. And that was the other finding, that there's not a correlation with either the keto group or the Miami Heart group of the LDL to the total plaque score. And that's why this is a really fantastic graph. Go ahead.
Let me get this right. The blue squiggly lines, that's each individual person's LDL-C data point. So
Correct.
That's not over time with one person, each person. And so down at the bottom of the graph, you can see that it goes from 0 to 80. That's the 80 participants. And so participant number 1 had an LDL of 210 or something and had no plaque burden whatsoever. And then you can even see over towards the middle, some of the keto group had LDL cholesterols above 500, one almost 600, 0 plaque score. I'm seeing that right? Because I know this can be confusing to people that don't look at charts and graphs all day. And so over half of the keto group who had LDL cholesterol, virtually all of them above 200, have no plaque burden. It's 0 plaque score. And this is after how many years of being on a ketogenic diet and having high LDL cholesterol?
4.7 years, average 272, max 591. And you can see, that 591 person has 0 plaque.
So for everybody watching this, so you've been to your cardiologist, right? And your LDL was 220, 250, 300, whatever. And your cardiologist immediately acted like, dude, you've got to stop keto carnivore right now. You're going to die. How many people tell me in the comments, how many of you guys have been literally told by your doctor, this is going to kill you. You are going to die. Here's people with LDL cholesterols of 300, 400, 500, almost 600 with a 0 plaque burden after having this LDL for almost 5 years. And after being on a ketogenic diet for almost 5 years. Do you understand? There is no correlation at all between the plaque, the TPS, the plaque burden score, and their LDL cholesterol. You would see those curves going together if there was any relationship. Am I wrong here, gentlemen? You would see some sort of suggestion in the curves that, oh yeah, look, when the LDL gets super high, you can see their plaque going up. And you just don't see that at all here.
That's what would likely be expected given the present lipid hypothesis. Now, as excited as this is, I've got to do the standard reset the room, if you will, and emphasize that this is quite literally our very first tranche of data. And the study is still ongoing, to be fair. And on top of that, while we're very excited for those people who did have the higher LDL and did not have any plaque, of course, if you're a cardiologist and you're looking at somebody on the far right end, and you're seeing that they do have plaque, especially if there's calcification, because we do have individuals who have calcification, the context could be different. How it applies or doesn't apply back to the lipid hypothesis isn't even necessarily as relevant to them as it is, well, now we know that you have some amount of detectable disease, and we may want to take steps to mitigate that. So this is where like our cardiology partners, especially people like Dr. Budoff, would say, yeah, this is, it's very exciting for how it's speaking to the lipid hypothesis overall. But at the same time, he would probably caution against immediately taking this data and looking at isolation, and then from that feeling confident without even knowing what your own risks are, especially if you're not necessarily like these individuals in this study. So it's interesting because a lot of times we're always trying to express our excitement and how meaningful these data are, but at the same time, trying to keep it in context and especially being respectful of our partners in this research space that are helping us get here.
Absolutely. And so for everybody watching this at home, if your cardiologist told you that, next time you see your cardiologist, say, well, how long do you think if I stay on keto and my LDL cholesterol is 200, 300, 400, 500, whatever it is, how long do you think before we'll start seeing the plaque buildup? And just see what your doctor says. If they're like, oh, within months, within a year, 2 years, well, here's some pretty clear data. So as soon as this research is published, there will be a link to this in the show notes. So if you're watching this live, we don't have a link yet because it hasn't been published. You're getting a sneak peek, okay? And so, but I want you to I want people to understand this very clearly. There were people who had LDL cholesterols of 300, 400, 500 for years and still had no hard plaque, no calcified plaque, but also no soft plaque, no stenosis, according to the CT angiogram. Nick?
Can I make a social commentary?
Yes.
Like Dave said, we're very excited, but what we're doing here on your massive platform and in general on social media is something that doesn't have a ton of historic precedent, which is taking science and distributing it to the masses. Generally when something's presented at an academic conference, there's a bunch of academicians in a room who, are looking at the data and finding it interesting and questioning it. And that's, what this is, where this is at. The danger is, we are also in a way, like this is ammunition for your average person that should not be misused. So these are preliminary data that intellectually I find very provocative and very exciting, and I think we should. I would caution anybody against trying to use them as ammunition against your physician. I would say very much arm them with this information, to enhance shared decision making. But not only would that not be good for any individual's health, but honestly, there is a lot of pushback on this research, and it would only be a hindrance to the research if the findings were being misused and or they were being overinterpreted prematurely. So I'm pulling back a little bit. I'm very excited scientifically. I still do think clinical caution is warranted until the final results are published, the prospective results are published, and then we have validation with future trials, which, the onus is on the entire, biomedical community around this space to invest in studying this phenotype because it is so interesting. So, if those who are trying to brush it under the rug and look away, I think those are being the most irresponsible.
Yes. Thus the patients asking their doctor, how many years does it take this plaque to build up? Obviously, I want you to ask that question gently and diplomatically.
Well, and there's one more thing I want to say on that. Actually,
okay.
The thing that Budoff himself had said in the presentation, and that I also find Karam Nassir saying versions of this. I also see this from Bill Cromwell. A lot of folks are actually more moderate than you might think in saying, yes, you have high LDL, and they themselves say what they do is they then go to do the scan next. Because even before our study on people who do have genetically confirmed FH, they even found for those folks that if they had an LDL, say above 190, and yet they had a CAC of 0, that there didn't seem to be an association with risk, so long as they had a CAC of 0, getting back to the whole power of 0 thing. So again, nothing quite beats the actual detection of disease. The context changes if you do in fact have existing disease, especially if it's calcification. And we're not here to give medical advice on that, but it does help to sort of add that additional context that studies like this also may help you understand another avenue of furthering the context itself beyond just seeing the LDL level and then coming to a conclusion at a broad population scope like we're seeing here. I do want to mention one more thing, Ken. I don't want you to go all the way through the presentation unless, Nick, the one you provided is missing. It's not missing?
The last
okay.
slide. We don't want to, no.
Yeah, please don't go to the last. Yeah, it's
okay.
not. It's a superfluous slide, so don't worry. We're not hiding anything anybody's going to care about with data. It's not. Yeah, we'll tell you later, Ken, offline.
Oh, it's got an email. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah,
is that
we
the
just
one?
Don't want
yep.
certain people.
Yeah. We don't want to dox anybody. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Next slide.
We went over this. This is just again showing there's no association between the LDL cholesterol and the plaque score.
Fascinating.
So this is screenshotable. It's the graphical abstract. We went over everything, and then the findings are just bulleted on the right.
So this is the image, everybody. If you want to pause this and take a screenshot and post this to your favorite social media, this is the image. Basically the same information that we had just went over. Keep in mind, this is not based on CAC scores, which a lot of plant-based cardiologists say is not helpful, is not help with diagnosis or treatment. These are CT angiograms of the coronary arteries. So I don't know of a cardiologist who says a CT angiogram won't see a soft plaque or a stenosis. I think they all admit that. That's what we see.
I know of one that says that, or I just recently found out one who says that.
Really? Not by mistake, on purpose.
Oh, you didn't know this? You didn't actually know this?
No. Clearly, are you talking about the tweet? Because I saw the tweet, but I thought he just misunderstood what the study was about. Did he really mean what he said?
I shared with Nick something. Nick will back me up. There literally is somebody who doesn't feel confident that a CT angiogram can see soft plaque.
And this is a cardiologist.
He lies a lot, like directly falsifiable claims.
Yeah. Because that sounds like a big fat lie. I think anybody who's looked at enough CAT scans, they know you can see soft tissue on a CAT scan. You can see livers, and kidneys, and adrenal glands, and arteries and arterial walls. You can see soft tissue. You can see soft plaque. Come on.
I won't comment further.
Yeah, we'll leave it alone.
I'm just gonna say things I regret.
Yes, yeah. Let's not do that. Okay, let's not do that. So, the lipid energy model. This sounds very sexy. I need somebody to explain this to me.
You take it this time, Nick. Go ahead.
So we describe this phenotype. If you look down in the bottom right of the white image, you see that little triad. The purple ball is the high HDL, the green ball is the high LDL, and then the triglycerides, a little low yellow ball. The question is, what explains this phenomenon? Like, how does it arise? How does it arise as a metabolic response to carbohydrate restriction? And the idea is, if you're lean and metabolically healthy, then the hormonal preconditions, let's say, without getting too into the nitty-gritty, are set such that when you go low carb, you need to really upregulate your fat trafficking system in order to feed your muscle tissue with fatty acids and replenish your fat cells, which are spitting out their own fatty acids. So the fatty acids get spit out of the fat cells. They then get taken up by the liver. You can think of it as almost spillover, repackaged into these big spherical particles, very low density lipoproteins, VLDL, And then those get shipped back out as part of a systemic lipid trafficking system where then the VLDL have their triglycerides kind of sucked out of them by a protein called lipoprotein lipase to, again, feed the muscle tissues, replenish the fat cells. And as the VLDL shrink, what they become is LDL. Very low density lipoprotein becomes LDL. The triglycerides have now been pulled out. So now you have high LDL because it's VLDL has been turned into LDL. Low triglycerides have been pulled out. And when you shrink a sphere, the surface area decreases, right? And that's a lot of the cholesterol is going to be in the surface, which then gets, released and taken up by a particle, HDL. Small HDL take up the cholesterol. So then the HDL-C, the HDL cholesterol goes up, and then you end up with this triad. And the really powerful thing about this model, which is based on extrapolations from prior evidence, you can read the paper published in Metabolites 2022, and we can link it in the show notes. I shared the link with you, Ken, is that it makes predictions. And these predictions are very easy to test. We put some levers there, things like carbohydrate intake, adiposity or body fat, energy expenditure. So pulling any of these levers, you should be able to manipulate the LMHR triad. And you can do that in very bold ways. Dave's done it with some of his N=1s. I did it with the Oreo study ongoing. And, it makes a prediction. You can test that prediction and see how the model holds up and evolve it. So as any model should. This is standing explanation that will evolve as we do more research into it. But thus far, I think it does a pretty good job of explaining everything we're seeing. Far more elegantly, in my opinion, than something like just saying, oh, it's just genetics or saturated fat, which really don't provide elegant explanations or complete explanations.
I agree completely. Okay. Onward.
As long as it's not the last slide.
let me take it out and let me look and see. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
I can.
Okay, I think we're good. Yeah, we're good. Okay, here's the next slide.
Oh, this was for clinical relevance. As in, again, if you saw the last slide, one of the levers was carbohydrate intake. So prediction, add back carbs, LDL goes down. Yeah. So this was a case series published in our first paper from patients, Dr. Tro's patients, where he treated them with just like adding back a little bit of carbs, 50 to 100 grams of carbs. And what you see here is the LDL drop. You just revert the phenotype. You give him a sweet potato, and LDL can drop almost 500. The one guy had a drop of 480. So, this is a very responsive phenotype to just macronutrient manipulation. That was the point.
And so that speaks very strongly against a genetic cause, because a sweet potato wouldn't have that much effect if it were merely a genetic cause. Like, many mainstream doctors are trying to blame many things on being just genetics and out of our control. But we've actually had people in our group when they're going to, and I think there used to be a guy who had a protocol. If you needed to lower your LDL cholesterol for insurance purposes or something, you could eat some white bread and fat-free turkey, or a sweet potato should work just fine too. And you could actually drop your LDL cholesterol to the point where your doctor wouldn't freak out and your insurance company wouldn't raise your rates. Can't remember that guy's name, but this is a study that basically shows that to be exactly true. And many people who were worried about being a lean mass hyperresponder, indeed, they added some fruit back into their diet and said, yeah, man, when I did that, my LDL came down. But they're assuming that high LDL is a risk factor for clogging up their coronary arteries, for heart disease, for heart attack. And what this presentation seems to be suggesting is that it's quite possible that there is no connection between an elevated LDL cholesterol and an elevated risk of plaquing in the coronary arteries. So do you need to add that?
An emphasis on, I said in lean mass hyperresponders, an emphasis on possible. I guess the point of this slide is, given that there is so much unknown, if you don't have a therapeutic indication, if it were me and I weren't using a ketogenic diet therapeutically, I'd eat a freaking sweet potato. I like sweet potatoes.
Yeah,
me too. Biggie. If you have a therapeutic indication, it becomes a little bit more tricky. You're between a rock and a hard place as a patient. But for those who, don't want to gamble and they're not between a rock and a hard place, yeah, add a sweet potato, some figs, some goat cheese is delicious.
Yep. But for people who use a ketogenic diet therapeutically for a gastrointestinal condition or an orthopedic condition or a dermatological condition or a mental condition in which 12 Oreos or a sweet potato once a day or, a bunch of fruit once a day would literally cause their disease process to return, then they're in a bind. They're like, well, I've got this sky high LDL, but I don't want my mental health issue or my gut issue to come back. So I don't want to eat that sweet potato or the Oreos or the white bread. So what do I do? And I think when this lean mass hyperresponder is published, peer reviewed and published, so that it can then be picked apart by the detractors are lining up like buzzards beside the interstate. You guys are aware of that. They can't wait. And I heard one guy saying, well, this hasn't even been peer reviewed yet. We're not even going to talk about this. Like, yeah, they haven't even thought to have it peer reviewed. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Incidentally, that guy was doing victory laps when the keto-like diet study was not published, in which the keto-like diet was 25% kcal from carbs and unpublished.
Right.
So
and I think one of the
standards that float around.
I think one of the beautiful things about social media and about Twitter and YouTube and all this stuff is that it gives everybody a chance to see behind the curtain. It gives people a chance to see MDs, PhDs, JDs, everybody for just the human being that they are, who has a preconceived notion and by God, they're right and everybody else is wrong. It's just human nature. None of us can help it. And so I love it that right now we've got 2,100 people who are able to see behind the curtain that previously people in just regular life, they don't go to medical conferences, physiology, nutrition. They don't know any of these conversations. They don't know any of the personalities. And I think it's invaluable that they're able to see that, man, at the very top levels of medicine and nutrition and lipidology, they're dudes and chicks just like us. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I've been thankful for social media because this research wouldn't have been possible without it. I wouldn't have been able to see the patterns that I did were it not for all the amount of networking. And I wouldn't have been able to raise the money, as I was talking about before, were it not for letting people know that we're putting it together and to please see if you can help make this happen. And incidentally, Ken, I'm confident there are many people who are watching this right now who themselves have directly contributed to the Citizen Science Foundation. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank everybody who has helped, because that's literally how it happened. So social media does have some problems. It also has some amazing, amazing things that it can do for us. And I'm so thankful that we've been able to get this much done that way.
So Will Fredrickson says, how do we donate for future study?
Thank you for the opportunity to plug. First of all, there's the citizensciencefoundation.org, citizensciencefoundation.org. You can donate right now. But I will tell you a little secret. I think, Ken, we're launching tomorrow. We're going to have a contributor conference that we're actually going to be holding in Vegas in the middle of March. And I don't know, Ken, do you think we can maybe talk you into coming over and saying a few words at the con? It's a good excuse to get to Vegas with the missus, right?
Nisha has never been to Vegas. And so
what?
I think that, don't you think she needs to check that off the list? She needs to go to Vegas at least once.
I would love to provide like the best excuse ever to come to Vegas.
Exactly. It's for work. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So give us the website again in case people want to donate $1, $5, $5,000. Hey, it's fine, to the Citizen Science Foundation. How do they do that?
citizensciencefoundation.org. And again, really, truly, it's taken the help from everybody. Whatever you can comfortably contribute, that's fine. We have, pulled off funding this first study, and we need another tranche so that we can do a new study. That's what this conference is going to be for. we need to raise a lot more money because this next one that I want to do, I want it to be twice as many people. We would have an actual control that's built in. We would have more permissive levels, so it doesn't have to be quite as high of HDL and as low of triglycerides, for example. And there may even be risk factor permissiveness. I can't say too much until we've actually finalized it, but it's going to be a whole new study, and we're pretty serious about getting it together. So and we have a resume. You know where your money is going. And last thing I'll fit in is we do have a 0% admin overhead. We don't take any piece of it ourselves. The only piece that goes out is for third-party services like credit card charging or hosting and so forth. But it's virtually everything heads in the direction of the Lundquist itself and travel expenses, things like that.
Yep. And do you take Bitcoin? Saw a question go by.
No, you know what? I feel kind of ashamed that I honestly, I'm going to talk to our internal person. We should get that going for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Somebody asked in the comments. So yeah, maybe get that set up. All right. Or do we have more slides? Are we getting close to the end, Nick? Or can I go to the next one safely?
Wait, I can double check that. But
the money shot was pretty much the graph because it's kind of the two major components.
You can go one more. I mean, there's like a limitations and conclusions slide, but the next one is about the power of CAC. Yeah. So this is just from another study, not lean mass hyperresponders, but just making the point that if you have a CAC of 0, and this is CAC in a general population. So for clinical relevance, I think the point was that, having higher LDL might not be that strongly associated with myocardial infarction. So anyway, this was not LMHR specific, but for example, a question that came up in the Q&A was, well, we have a patient that comes in with elevated LDL and low carb. What do we do? And the presenter kind of pointed back to these data saying, look, we actually have data on people with elevated LDL. Get a scan, get a functional test of what's going on in their arteries so you can risk stratify and then determine, does this person need treatment or might they, be at lower risk? I think that was the main point. So, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, guys, let me go back to the money shot and then we can wrap this up. I think everybody, this presentation has been worth every penny that everybody's paid to watch this on YouTube, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter. So, Dave, you want to wrap this up, and then Nick can put a bow on it.
Yeah, certainly. I've obviously been very appreciative of how this data has looked so far. To bring it back to engineering, this is a prototype. You can get very excited about a prototype because it's demonstrating something that might not have been thought possible before. But that's all the more reason why we want to do another study to be confirmatory. And it's great though, because it took us so long to just get to this first step. It took so much work to get here. And again, I appreciate everybody's support in making this happen. Nick?
I think what my closing comment is going to be, which is it's a monumental moment, but it's not the climax. It's not the end of the story. It's barely the beginning. I mean, leading up to this point, there's been, a lot of work to get here, but, a lot of that work was laying the groundwork for what's to come. This has been a hard discussion to get started. Now it's forced. The discussion has to happen, and a lot of people are really interested in it. So we're at an inflection point. We're not at the climax. And, this moment, December 8th, it was the catalyst for what's going to come in 2024 and beyond. So I think 2024 is going to be even more exciting than 2023. And then that pattern is going to progress as we gain more allies and also more resources ourselves. So this train has no sign of slowing down, and I'm very excited.
Me too. I can't wait. And I want to thank you both for the work you're doing. Dave, for leaving money on the table to work on a health research topic that fascinated him personally and had personal connotations for him, but also that potentially stands to help millions of people understand their metabolism. And then Nick already got his PhD, working on his MD. Now, hopefully, as soon as this video is over, he will go to bed, because I can tell he's post-call. He needs some sleep because he's got a round in the morning. So thank you both very, very much for hanging out with me this evening. I'm going to put links to everything down in the show notes. As soon as the study's published, I'll put a link. I'll come back, and I'm always doing that to my videos, adding links in the show notes so that everybody's got all the information. You'll be able to print this study out and take it to your doctor and say things like, now, how many years does it take before plaques start to show? All right, guys.